Welcome to Closing Conversations, a show for founders, leaders, and sellers who win together. I'm Max Notice. Today's guest is Ken Pouliot, an enterprise sales leader who scaled SaaS revenue from 10 million to 75 million, led teams at Box, Gigya, Percolate, and SheerID, and knows exactly what it takes to turn a go-to-market motion into a growth engine. We talked about everything from the rise of AI and its impact on sales roles to why real enablement, not surface-level onboarding, is the difference between a team that survives and one that dominates. We also get into how great sellers will always stand out, especially when the tech gets smarter and the shortcuts get louder. If you're building a sales team, leading one, or trying to stay relevant in a market that is evolving fast, this one's for you, and let's get going. All right, so anyway, I'm even just going to skip past the formal introduction. Everybody who's listening, this is Ken Pouliot. Ken, why don't you go ahead and just introduce yourself, and we're going to continue with this conversation.
God, what do you say after that? Ken Pouliot, what more do you need to know? So I've been doing this for probably about 25, 27 years in go-to-market. I've run a lot of teams. I've had the fortunate to have a lot of great teams work with me, and then also been an IC for a long period of time too. So, a chance to really kind of rise through the stream, and have been lucky enough to be a CRO at a couple different companies. So it's been a really good life so far, but great people allow you to, have great teams. So that's probably the biggest flip.
You're preaching to a choir here for sure on this show. All right, now let's get right back into what we were talking about, because that was some really good shit. So I agree. I think this is another revolution, and really a revolution within the tech space, within the workspace. I have to imagine that when the internet became a bigger deal, you have people that are still going door to door bringing resumes, and then they'll look at someone who says, I could copy and paste my resume into a job board, and it got to 1,000 places, and the person going door to door says, well, that's cheating. And it's like, it's not. I'm using the system. But on the flip side of that, if I'm going door to door, I get a better impression. I can show up in a suit. I can have that thick, glossy paper that I'm bringing it to and say, I really care. So going along with your point, I think in terms of AI, in terms of the actual sales job, it's going to make that mass communication a lot easier. And like you said, if I'm someone who hides behind email, I'm going to reach more people, but I'm not going to excel. Whereas the same as it's always been, I think, in a sales role, it's my job to make it abundantly clear that I am a person who's trying to reach out to you specifically for a specific reason. And I'm going to have to differentiate myself from the noise. So there's always been some sort of a new big status quo that makes scale easier in our capacity. But meeting someone in person, there was a company I was prospecting to, and it was Stewart's gas stations. And I took a picture of myself with my daughter in a Stewart's onesie outside of a station saying, give me a chance. And maybe I can do that, but that's inauthentic, and I think that'll end up coming through.
It was funny. I was listening to the CEO who's had multiple exits, and he was saying, how do you do it? He goes, I've had multiple exits and I do the same 15 things. Probably 10 out of the 5 are about human connection, right? And so if you're that type of seller now, you're in a good situation, right? If you're the person who's driving relationships, making sure you're the last person at the bar to say hello to people, to make the connections, to do those things, then you're going to be fine. You're going to be fine through any technology shift, I think, that ever happens, because I still think ultimately people buy from people. But again, if you're back into this thing where you just think spray and pray, I'm going to send out 200 emails or 1,000 emails a day, and that's going to work, I just think those odds of being that salesperson have become a lot less. The other thing is, I think it's going to up everyone's game. So here's the thing. It was really hard before when you had to know all about a company and you had to know all about a person and everything else. Now it's pathetically easy, right? So it's I can know everything about Ken Pouliot. I can know everything about Max. I can figure all that stuff out from the web. And there's even things that tell me oh my God, here's who they went to school with. And so it's gotten very easy. The tools have gotten very easy to fan out and that stuff. So if you're not upping your game up to that next level, then, shame on you. And I think this is where, so every once in a while, I've seen this shift 3 times, right? And so this happened also after when everybody, believe it or not, went to the web, right? And there was these big shifts where for a while, everybody thought sales was easy. And then we get into, I would say, a valley. And the valley is because there's new technology coming out and a whole bunch of other stuff where good salespeople people that aren't so great are having a really tough time finding jobs because they didn't keep investing in learning. They didn't keep reinvesting and looking at technology and everything else, and they became complacent. Then you have to say to yourself, well, maybe you're really not a salesperson, right? Maybe you've got other, positions or other things you'd really like to do. But I think the people who keep upping their game and doing the stuff still similar to like what you just said with your daughter, that cuts through the clutter, right? I remember when we did something for REI where we all went out to REI shops, right? And we all took pictures in one of their locations. And then we also went out and did some type of outdoor activity. That got right to the C-suite and they were like, yeah, let's have a meeting, and we loved it. And then we used it for the final presentation. So I think that kind of personalization, showing the authentic you, is going to be crucial and something you need to do.
I remember before the pandemic, I could send out 400 emails and it would personalize their name and company name of the same exact thing to 400 people. And of those 400 emails, I would do it once a week, just grab email addresses like a wood chipper, put them in there, and then I get 5 meetings booked from that. And now, obviously, the stakes are up, like you're saying, the level of play is elevated. So, all right, I can put in, let's say, 400 into some software and it'll hyper personalize them and say, hey, I saw you also went to Brandeis University. And oh, it looks like we overlapped with this person on LinkedIn. And okay, I'm going to generate some meetings, but they're also going to be surface level meetings because this was a surface level interaction. Whereas I think it's going to become even more powerful than it has been of the person to person type of a sale. That's what's cutting through the clutter. Like today, my email inbox, I get maybe like my personal email, I get like 2 emails a week that actually have something to do with me. And sometimes they get lost because there's so much like fucking noise. And I think it's only going to get worse with AI.
And I heard you. See, now it's like it's bringing you back. It's like it's stopping you off.
Yeah, but at the same time, I was talking to someone else who says, that advisor role of like, I'm a gun for hire salesperson and I know 5 companies that I represent. That's going to be more powerful because I don't want to have to vet these 5 companies. I just want to know the real of like, who should I be talking to? Because they're all giving me some sort of a valid reason that I'm skeptical of working with them. And I think probably like as a sales team, this is what I'm seeing. It's like Roy Kent from Ted Lasso. You have to be here, be there, be every fucking where. As an individual seller, I'd say put your emphasis much heavier, as always, on like that personal relationship and do those things to stand aside from the AI. But if this is a team you're running, you probably want to have both going a bit at the same time.
But this is where I always tell, it was interesting because there was somebody who was just getting into sales who asked me this question. They're like, well, what would you do if you were, starting off as an IC? And this gets right on to your question about like figuring out being that connection, right? And I said, I was very, very fortunate when I was selling into financial services that I got a chance to know a whole bunch of people at Goldman Sachs in security at the time, right? And since then, almost all of them have gone on to either form different companies or even, one of them who went on to not only become a partner at Goldman, but then went on to become the CISO of Google. And so when you look at all of them, early in my career, and this should be for any new AE that's out there, find the people couple companies that you go, these companies are really doing something really interesting and everybody's watching them. And those are the companies you want to, especially if they're within your region, you want to start to like combine yourself with, right? And really get to know and find out, say, listen, I'm going to get to know this guy or this gal. And then I'm going to get to know them because they're going to be shooting up the rocket to do a million different other things. That personal relationship, the fact that I'm helping them with something, whatever it might be connecting them, might be, hopefully selling them some software or whatever. But if you can do that with 4 or 5 people that you think are on the way up and with a couple of companies that you think are on the rise, you'll always have a good group of people because it's interesting, 6 degrees of separation from those people. But definitely look for the A-risers. You can find them because they're always writing papers. They're always getting up on stage. They're always doing something. They're always getting awards. And when you start to see those people, try to get in line with them and try to get connected with them because that's going to be really good for your career. Those are the people to really build good personal relationships with.
So I heard some great line from someone that I was talking to. They said, the thing with salespeople is that in theory, you could be working 24 hours a day. There's always something more you could do. You could always reach out to another person. You could always watch a webinar to sharp. Like in founding a company, there's always a to-do list that you're never going to get to the end of. So the best salespeople are the ones who know what to spend their time on and what not to spend their time on because they pick, these are the things that translate to the most money to do those. And AI obviously makes it easier to tackle more of that list because you can have it do certain things for you.
By the way, this is how crazy it gets. You can even track to what are their spending habits, right? Because you can start to see like what are their do they have up and down quarters? What are the best quarters? When do they buy? Right? I mean, it's just a plethora of information you can start to pull instead of just pulling like 10Ks.
I had Canon in my territory, and one quarter I had to read like a 70 something page document of their quarterly report. And then the next quarter, it took me 6 seconds to see what was going on with their company and who I needed to talk to about it. But so, these are things like on the desk level that we're talking about, in terms of outreach, in terms of managing your day. You and I were also talking about from a much more high level, what does this mean for companies and companies booming and companies managing their people? One of the things that you'd said is that you think that there's going to be just a lot more startups that come out of the gate because they need less people to do what they need them to do.
Yeah. So there was Aaron Levy who started Box. Brilliant guy, by the way, really brilliant guy. He made a comment like back then that we were living in an age where you don't need a lot to start a company, right? Like everything was moving into the cloud. That was the big cloud push. I would say that's the next big push that we're going through is this AI push, right? You see it even on LinkedIn, you see it all over the place now. It's like, how can I start up a company with 5 people? How can I start up a company with 10 people, right? So I think that's going to be the next push. And I think it's going to open up where I'll give you an example where you could sit there and say, I always wanted to do this, but you know what? I didn't know how to code. I didn't know how to do this. I didn't know how to this. Well, now with no code environments, with prompting, with AI and things that you can start to put together. I mean, you can go to some of them, like I think, what is it, Gloomy and some other things where I was like amazed at this. You could say, looked at all the LinkedIn things, find this piece and send out these. Like these aren't things that are really difficult to learn. And so not saying a salesperson should learn how to do no code, but I'm like, these are going to, I think, create our next big wave. If it doesn't happen this year, you'll see it next year, where we're going to have massive new companies that are starting, which, by the way, innovation is always fantastic for salespeople because when you go through a lull, then you're going to go through a high. And I deeply believe this. A lot of founders are tech people. And so they try to build everything as best they can so they can sell itself. But you need salespeople. Sooner or later, you're going to need someone who's going to actually do the hard work of knowing the meetings you've got to go to, grinding out the go-to-market message, getting those repeatable sales and then kind of going through things. So I'm super excited because I think, like I said, I think there's going to be this opportunity of a whole bunch of new companies coming out. So, if you're really good, you'll be able to come in and take one of those jobs pretty quickly and then kind of run with the races. And there'll be new features, new functionality, all of this. Because it was just, I remember as a company we used to go, wow, we were lucky if we got like 1 or 2 features a quarter. Now, can you remember the software company that doesn't come out with like 100 or 50, right? Like it's just, things are happening faster and faster. And I think in that aspect, there'll be a new AI economy.
Totally. I feel like it's almost like the gold rush, where post-COVID, tough times for salespeople. There's not innovation happening. Buyers are buckling their belts. You're scraping at doors to get anything open. And now with AI, I mean, every fucking person and their mother is starting an AI company. And if it's not an AI company, they're slapping AI on it and then selling it as an AI company. But not only that is they're able with the same, so let's say $20 million that you get in funding from some VC, instead of hiring 20 people for a 3-year project, you can hire 5 people. And so maybe that even means that they get less initial funding, but they have the same expectation of what they would have, or the same funding, and it's bigger expectation.
I will tell you, almost all of the people I talk to, either in VC or PEs, they're all doing AI audits, and they're all looking to see how they can get another 10 to 20% uplift with AI somehow, right? And so it behooves every company to start looking at that and bringing in their appropriate tools. And again, this is where if you can get comfortable with the technology, whether it's, hey, spend a weekend, take a class, do whatever you got to do, get comfortable with the technology so that you are not kind of like that person that looks like, oh, I only take faxes, right? Like, because there's some people who are like, oh, AI, and I'm very, very against it. And I'm like, don't look at it like you can't do it. Look at it like just spend some time and you realize it's not as scary as everybody thinks. And then, then like I said, then when they go through the AI audit, you want to be on that team that's looking at that new technology and realizing how you can use it. And hopefully, be the person that's, advocating for it on the opposite end.
Oh my God. Like I'm thinking if I'm a PE, I'm looking at every company and saying, All right, like if I'm looking at myself, I'm saying, all right, we need to know exactly how this shit works. And we're going to look at every company in our investment portfolio and we're going to trim headcount by 70% and know exactly what to put where.
So I can tell you, I was just, like I said, watching this video this weekend about a founder and about this guy. He has 20 companies, right? And so he does a prompt. It sounds very not personable, but he did a prompt, and it prompts out. He prompts each one of the companies. He has a master prompt, puts it in, throws it out, and then he says, where can they get 20 to 30% growth, right? And then he's going back to the CEOs and saying, here's what this is saying. Do you agree or disagree? So I think whether or not they'll be able to do it might be up for debate on each given case, but they're all being asked for it, right? And they're all going to be judged about their readiness for it or their not readiness for it. This is why I personally think there's also a reckoning coming about workforce. And, I think we had talked about this briefly before in the past. I do think there's also a chance where usually go-to-market gets hit really, really hard when there's any type of change, because it's very easy to say this person's not performing, this person's performing. Fire a couple of CSMs, fire a couple BDRs, and then grow from there. But what they don't realize is it really hurts revenue. It really hurts churn numbers. It really hurts all those things. So they don't rebound as quickly, so that quote unquote trying to transform the company to get to either profitability or AP and AI kind of push can lead to substantial revenue loss. I'm going to be talking more about that later at a different time, but because I think that's also happening now too. But anyway, so yeah, get connected, spend some time, and get excited, because I think it's going to be a really, 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 really exciting future. And for salespeople, I mean, listen, who wants to do some of that really boring stuff, like tracking down all this stuff, right? It's almost like every AE team I ever owned, they're all like, well, can we have like our own admin? And then their SDR would be their own admin or something. And they're like, no, now you're going to have all these tools. They're going to help you be really, really hyper vigilant. But I do think this is going to change the MO of a really good AE. And I think really good AEs are already doing this, but it's really going to be, instead of pushing, it's all going to be about helping. And that's actually, I think when we talked about before, I see a lot of change where a lot of people, you see a lack of revenue growth in some companies, really more from indecision than decision. And as we were talking about before, I think with Jolt and the guys that had written, what was the name of the company? Challenger Sale. I think both of those guys are coming out with 2 books, right? Jolt has been out there for a while and has got, I think he collected over 60 million or 6 million gong calls or whatever. It's like insane, right? That they reviewed. And it's this indecision pattern that's happening. And it's like, how do you fight indecision? And so instead of being pushy and pushing a goal, now it's really about learning 2 things. One is, how do I make this decision as risk-free as possible? And how do I really listen for those cues? So it's about not really, do I have the best product, but it's really about like, is it going to roll out without any issues, right? And now it's what you were saying before. Am I really spending my time with the 80% of people who are really going to do something? Because now with this lack of movement, I've really got to make sure my time is going into the right place at the right time. And if I don't, then, I could be wasting my time and not hitting my numbers. So 2 good books. Like I said, Jolt Up is already out there. And I think the guy, last time I spoke to him, he's going to have Reframing out in August.
I agree with so much of what you're saying. I also think that when sellers are desperate is when they start really pushing their product. Like you only have 3 potential opportunities. You're going to your quarterly review. You only have 3 potential opportunities. You're not really sure on any of them. So you get into claw mode. You kind of lose yourself, sense of self as a seller. But if you can use these tools properly and find out what companies are really looking for this, you can put a huge menu in front of you. And then again, when selling starts and we stop selling and we start helping. And then to your point, instead, I'm a big believer in when you're selling, like, fuck your bag of tricks. Like, fuck what you're bringing to, like, fuck your product. Like, pretend that you are on the team with them, that you work with them. All right, how do we figure this out? Like, what is this? And why are we doing it this way? That doesn't make sense. Like, sometimes when you put yourself as the adversary, you can't point out the red flags that you're seeing on their side because you're trying to keep this, like, politeness balance in a way. But if you're acting like, hey, I'm your buddy, why do we do that? That doesn't make sense. Wait, you just said that we spend 3 days a week on this, but it's no problem. Dude, that's a huge problem. And then if my thing can solve it, great. And then it's like a shoe and a horn, like it naturally slides in. Otherwise, I'm jamming it in there and trying to explain why you should use my service, and I don't even know what your problem is.
So 9 times out of 10, so that's the big issue I think that's come out, is that we've done an incredible job as an organization and go to market just in general about tailoring, doing everything we possibly can for you to know as much as you possibly can when you blow your nose about where you should go and what you should buy. But this consultative coming back and being like, how can I help you? Maybe you don't need, maybe you need, a drug instead of tissue paper, right? Whatever it might be, but it's getting to know them. And then that's where, as we were talking about originally with your daughter, that's where it comes to being, how can you be authentic and just say that you're really there to help and that you just want to try to get them from one point to the other in a good way, right? Because the other thing you're seeing, and I hear this all the time, is you're also seeing where people are saying their churn has never been higher. And that's all because of the past sales that we had, which is try to shove everything in, just try to get the deal in. And then when it doesn't work and they aren't happy, they get rid of it, right? And so you really, especially as an ARR company, have kind of like put yourself in a bad situation. So it's actually funny. It was like laughing because I was talking to another friend of mine who's a CRO. We were laughing. It was like the debate right now about which is more important, the churn or your ARR growth. And it's combined because as a CRO, you're in charge of all revenue. And I was like, that's usually because it's sometimes siloed and you bring it together and it's like, you got to make sure you solve it in kind of the today's world, right? And that is maybe you never really leave. So that CSM role and everything else, like, listen, if you can really focus on good growth on that 20% of your customers that are going to bring you 80% of your revenue, then maybe you spend more time with the CSM and you do some more things just to make sure that you're really building that relationship for further down the road.
I like that point. It's really one and the same.
You're hearing it sometimes split differently from sometimes executives can be confusing about it as like saying, well, we hit the numbers. Okay. And then quietly they go, but we're now at 80% churn, right? So you're like, okay, it's all the same bucket, guys, at the end of the day. So we're an ARR company, right? So we need it on both sides. So, but I think that's what's got to change a little bit. Now, what scared me was, I don't know if you saw this, but it wasn't that long ago. I think it was this year that Gartner came out that 76% of people don't want an AE, right? And that's why we've seen the growth of PLG.
Wait, 26% of buyers don't want an AE?
Yeah. And the
Wow.
reason being is because for too long, we've had this emphasis of just bang it out, do whatever you can. Exactly like we were saying, right? Like it doesn't even matter if it fits or doesn't fit. I'm just going to sell you something. And you might get so nervous or whatever protracted that you buy something and then you get rid of it, right? And so I think that's all kind of coming to roost. And that's why we saw the rise of PLG and the rise of all these other things is because as salespeople, we've got to up our game a little bit more and really get in there and understand, are we really attacking their pain points? Do we really understand long-term what the sale means to them? And it harkens back to me, a long time ago, because I got a lot of gray hair when it sprouts out occasionally. But something I learned a long time ago at an old computer company, software company, and they used to say, ask the question like, what does this mean? If this was really successful, what would this mean to you personally? And I think we sometimes get away from that. And, one time I remember as an IE and even as a manager and as a CRO, person says, you know what? I get a chance to go home and see my kids because every weekend this thing's blowing up. But it's like making that personal connection, understanding, say, okay, that's what we got to focus on post sale is to make sure this guy doesn't have to do anything with his kids, right? And then maybe even sending like something to the person like, hey, listen, by the way, the first free weekend you have, take your kid out to the circus or something and send things like that's, driving down and making those personal connections, I think are going to be the key.
I so wholeheartedly agree with you. And I think a lot of the fault of this actually falls to sales leadership in why this is happening. Like, I'll give you an example. I'm working with a company, I'm reviewing their calls. I mean, this is something it's so universal. You get a buyer on and you say as a salesperson, well, the first call we're going to do is discovery. And they like roll their eyes, and they're like, okay. And now, because I've been told you by some sales philosophy, I'm going to bombard you for 25 minutes with questions because I was told to ask questions. And now you as the buyer are aware of this and you're going to answer questions in a way that doesn't give me too much because why the fuck am I asking so many questions and there's no real direction to them necessarily? Questions. Okay, then the next, okay, this all sounds good. We would love to show you a demo of how the service works. And you go, okay, and I got to put another hour on a calendar with you. Now I've spent an hour and a half and okay, it's going to begin and I'm going to recap. This is what we heard in the last call. Is that right? Does that still make sense? Okay, well, here's what we do, by the way. Before I show you the demo, here's what we're about. Here's what we think. Here's where we're going with all of this. Does that make sense? Is that exciting? And they go, fuck off, sure. And then they show you a demo, and that's when you see them get real critical and they lean in and they say, but does it do this? Does it do this? Does it do this? And then you're sweating, hoping your SE can help you out. And they go, all right, what's the pricing? And then if they're lucky, the person will give you the pricing. Sometimes they'll even say, well, let me ask you a few more questions, and then I'm going to give you a proposal. And it's like,
God, no, that doesn't piss off anybody more than that, right?
it's awful. But through all of this, you're leading the person to then lean on the discovery, on the demo, because now it's becoming a product feature sale, which is the worst thing that can happen in sales. People buy based on emotion, not based on product features. And if anything, now you're pissing them off to get them to this point. So I think that a lot of that happens when, let's say I'm a new salesperson going to a company and you say, well, we abide by this methodology. And here's how our deck works. Actually, 2 weeks into using this deck, marketing came out with a new deck, and we want you to memorize that deck, and we're going to have a test to make sure that you can do this deck. And this is becomes so over processed that you lose what selling is. You forget like what actually fucking connecting with the person is and getting the real out of them, that you're so focused on doing this how it goes, going by this process for the unique, this is our sale and our way, that you're not actually selling anymore, that you're just taking people through the motions and praying to God that you have the people in your schedule who are buying people, and that could be totally fucking random.
I think this gets, so by listening to what you just said, what's the core of that issue? The core of that issue is because we're not training people how to be effective salespeople. What we're training them on is a methodology, but not really sitting down to listen, not really sitting down. So I think, we've fundamentally seen this all the time. We take a lot of really good salespeople, we move them to managers, and immediately we don't train them how to be a good manager. We don't train them how to be a good coach. We don't do a lot of the things that they really need to do because they're bringing in frontline people who sometimes don't know anything. Maybe they got 2 or 3 years of BDR experience, which means basically they beat up people on the phone, right? Just to get input. This is actually why fundamentally I think you actually get better salespeople coming from CSMs than you do from BDRs, right? Now, all the BDRs are going to shoot me for this statement, but the reason being is you have to do a lot more listening, right? And the good thing is you're also listening to people who are in the seat complain about things that are going on, not only with the product, but just with the company. And that to me is sometimes a better feeder system. But ultimately, I look at back as, and I see this all the time still, I'm a big enablement person, right? We have fundamentally changed way back when I was an IC, a sales guy. You stayed no matter what, usually 3 to 4 years, right? First year, kind of made some money. Second year, you started making really good money. And then third or fourth year, you probably knocked it apart. You went to club once or twice by then already. And now you're like, holy crap, now they're going to double my number. So I'm probably going to go look for another gig, right? Unless the company was doing something great. So that has now gone down to 1 year, right? People flip in a year. And so if you aren't training them, and training them not on just a methodology, but training them on really like, are you really listening to their calls? Are you really sitting down and talking to them and be like, I find this happens a lot. People come in the first 90 days, you're like, okay, did you test them? And they're like, what do you mean, did you test them? I'm like, how many calls did you sit with through them? How many presentations did you sit with them so that they could actually then go through? And they go, oh, I did. And I go, I listened to them. And I go, I'm not trying to be like an overlord here or do skip level reviews, but I'm like, you know what? You didn't be like the Simon Cowell, right? Like people need good feedback in the beginning of a job to know like what they're doing right or what they're doing wrong. And it's okay to, you don't have to give it in they used this, the slang, a shit sandwich, right? Between how you deliver it. But I said, the key here is you got to be critical to say, no, that presentation was really terrible. And I'm like, but here's where it could be better. Let's work on it being better. And I don't think that's a key problem we still have, is that I still think we run really fast and we forget that we need to train our people and we need to train these people to do the greatest things that we can do so that they have an incredible career. So hopefully they stay more than a year or two and that they want to stay with you as a leader because you took time to help them in their career and really better them. I always tell people whenever I'm at a party, because they only want to hear crazy sales stories, right? And I have a lot of friends who are in the movie business and other things, and I used to always laugh and go, nobody wants to sit by the software guy, right? Like you're the least interesting guy in the room. But when you talk to people about, because they all think like their experience was with a car salesman, right? Or like a really bad salesperson. And I always go, God, as an industry, if we just took a little bit more time on training and we just took a little bit more time on investing in people, we would have people who would have great experiences, and then therefore the industry itself would be improving. But anyways, that's my sitting on a cartboard there and pontificating. So
Dude, I literally started my company to train salespeople at companies where the CRO did not have time to. Where the CRO says, I'm going to come and I'll do this. But CRO's job is to bring in big clients and then babysit sales team. And they call it that. They never really have time to put in. And, what we've learned is when you listen to somebody's hour-long call, it takes 2.5 hours to do so. To like really listen to it, to take the notes, then put really constructive feedback down. 2.5 hours for that, and then an hour to talk to them about it. Especially remotely where you can't see me and you can't get my body language as well. Like, I need to get you talking about not only why did you say this in the line to correct it to, but why do you feel that way? Why are you tiptoeing around certain points? Why is it that you don't know the product well? Is it that you're new to the industry? Is it that you're nervous and you're kind of going back to old weird habits of yours? And I think exactly as you're saying, executives aren't doing that. And even to the point of our earlier conversation, there's so much emphasis on, well, how can we reach out to more people? Oh, AI is going to help with that. How can we manage them with putting less time in? But you're forgetting, like, you don't pass a test in school unless you study. And it's the least exciting part. It's the pain in the ass of all of it. And you can come up with flashcards and you come up with new learning systems. But at the end of the day, it's the hard stuff that's going to get you there. It's the cold calling that's going to differentiate you from the masses of very personalized emails that are out there.
we were talking about the guy I was looking at who started and exited, 4 or 5 companies. And you know what his magic power was? He wrote letters. He wrote handwritten letters. He goes, I would write 10 handwritten letters a day. Now, this is a guy, by the way, a CEO, right? He goes, I would write 10 a day, especially when he goes, and he goes, think about it. Think about how many I wrote. He goes, I write thank you letter. He's like, because you know what? Out of everything else, people still get letters. And when they get letters, he goes, ultimately they read them when they're handwritten. He's like, so they may not return your phone call. He's like, but what are you looking for? You're only looking for 10% or one or two people, right? And then it opens up to a different conversation. But you got to be willing to put that hard work in to do that kind of stuff, or it just is not going to matter.
So I'll tell you, there's one of the companies that my company is working with right now. They brought us in because the salespeople, they just needed some guidance. They needed someone to be listening to calls and helping them to get their footing in this new sale. When we went in, the closing percentage was 10%. After 1 month of a 3-month contract, the closing percentage is 22%. After that same month, when we get in, their time to deal was 6 weeks. This is an SMB, mid-market team. It's now 6 days is their average time to close. And it's like, you could have brought in 50,000 AI softwares to do God knows what with this. But at the end of the day, it was that honest time of putting in, having them talk it out to you, seeing a new way of doing this. And now they can sell. They're playing chess while everybody out there is playing the checkers game of, here's my methodology, here's my pitch, here's my demo. Please, God, buy from me so I don't end up looking for a job in a month from now.
Then it really comes down to, it's just educating the market better. And, we all have to do that. It's really important to have enablement. And it's really important to make sure that you budget for it. Because it's like, okay, I can buy 20 more tools, but it's really important either to bring in a service like yourself or have an enablement person who brings in services, depending on different things, but that's dedicated to go to market, right? And making sure that, now again, I'm not saying that you shouldn't be enabling your engineering team and you shouldn't be doing others, right? I think that enablement is an important feature for a company, especially like I said, as people are so transient now with jobs. I just think when you treat your people right, things are going to ultimately be better, and everybody wants to be successful. Nobody wants to be unsuccessful, right? And that'll help you lure more talent in.
I think this is another interesting point is, what is the definition of enablement and how is that being implemented into a company? So I'm going to start this with a longer story. I think I saw this at Dreamforce, a whole talk about sales enablement, how the term was first documented in like the 1980s. I think at IBM, I could be getting that wrong, but it was basically, they realized the notion of if we really support and educate new salespeople, their ramp up goes from 12 months to 6 months. And when you have a huge sales force, like what a massive difference in revenue that makes. So then let's take a look at that at companies we've been at that we've seen recently. A lot of them, I think, they say, do you do enablement? They confuse that with onboarding and say, well, yeah, we bring them in. What's your sales enablement? Well, we put them through the challenger sale, and then we introduce them to all the department heads over the course of a week. And then they they learn the technologies and then they go at it. And that's not enablement. That's the same onboarding that you'd probably have for an engineer, for anybody else. And the whole idea is to get somebody to sell faster. Then you really have to look with an honest eye of what will make them sell faster, more confidently, or even take it as a much more black and white definition, is enabling salespeople who will be able to do the job to do it better. And I think that, you're going to bring on, let's say you bring on 8 new hires, 2 of them aren't going to work. Like, it's just how it goes, but of those 6, are you getting them to do the job? Are you getting them to own the sale, do it faster, be more confident, proud of themselves? Or are you, kind of throwing these things at them and saying, all right, you got your tools, go for it. And then at the end of the day, 2 of these people end up making it, or 4 of these people. And then that's a real problem. That's a lack of enablement.
I think it's critical for all startups that need to look at 2 roles and go to market, right? One is enablement and the other is RevOps, right? Like, the faster you can control understanding your numbers and your cost structures, the better conversations you're going to have with your board, with your CEO and CFO, right? The better you do with enablement and the better you can master that and get your ramp up time to be really slow, really fast and everything else, then everything else can be, everything else can hinge from that, right? But if you don't get those 2 right, you get a bumpy road.
It's so true. And I think a lot of, specifically on the sales enablement piece, I've been to startups where they say, all right, we're going to hire 6 people. The 6 people go out the gate in month 3. They're like, what's not working? Is it the messaging that's not working? Is it and it's exactly what you're saying. We don't know what's working and not working. And it could be something in the system that's not working, but then the salespeople get the brunt end of it. Or do you have the wrong people on, and then it's another issue. But I think that unless you're really putting in the time, putting in that effort, putting in that real manpower, that you're not going to know that, and you're going to be throwing shit at the wind and similarly praying to God that your board doesn't have your head.
Well, and then even with AI, there's no AI tool that I know that's out there, right? That's going to, even though they might go through all of your exchanges and everything else, and they may look like Gong does actually a really good job of this, finding out like, is nobody asking next steps and everything else, all training, but it's a tool, right? And the question is, the tool is only as good as the manager who is then using it to say, okay, we're going to do accountability reviews. We're going to go through. We're also going to look at when was the last time, sometimes you got to ask is, when was the last time you went through all the Gong calls of your team, right? Or all the calls of your team and then found out what was the appropriate coaching cycle that I should be adopting and pushing through. And the problem is your regional manager, this is why I think enablement team is either you outsource and bring on a team like yourself, or you hire someone to bring on someone who's got expertise. Because here's what happens. Your manager's so busy on trying to make sure the pipeline and the revenue's coming in that they lose a lot of focus on people and building out their people teams, right? And so I've always found that it's very rare that you find a good coach. And so that's why I think it's always augmented and you need a good enablement squad or you need an enablement plan, especially because sooner or later, even in a startup, they're going to want to start to see repeatable sales and productivity gains. If you miss that, then you may be out of a job. So you want to make sure you nail that one.
Ken, again, you're preaching to a choir. All right. I hate to do this, but believe it or not, we are at time.
Always good conversation, brother.
You're not kidding. That was awesome. Any last words for the audience? Any advice? Any just last thoughts you want to share?
Don't get downtrodden, get excited, right? I think, like I said, this is a time where a lot of people are pessimistic about a lot of things. I actually think this is, like I said, going to be the next crest of a lot of amazing jobs and a lot of new ways to go about selling. You just got to be open-minded to always be learning. So if you do that, you're going to be fantastically do well.
Awesome. All right, Ken.
Great, man. As always, stay in touch.
We'll see you next time.
And that's a wrap for this episode of Closing Conversations. Big thanks to Ken Pouliot for joining us. If you liked this episode, make sure to follow, rate, and share it with a teammate or founder who's navigating the same challenges. For more on building sales teams that deliver, visit commissionsales.com. We'll see you next time, and until then, let's get closing. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this conversation, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget, you can always catch us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts for more episodes of Closing Conversations.